today's gospel, we are reminded once again that the call to follow Christ is not about a lifestyle where we forget about sin and morality. Instead, it is a call to a life where we focus in on these things even more intently than perhaps we would have before we had known Christ. Jesus starts today's gospel by telling us that if our virtue goes no deeper than that of the Pharisees, then we're in trouble. He then goes on to say, you've heard it said that if you commit acts of murder, then you will go before the court to answer for that. But I tell you, if you are angry with someone, you will actually go before the courts for that. Now, what he's talking about here is this idea that when we are followers of Christ, it's not simply just about our actions. Instead, it is also about our thoughts, our speech, our motivation. The things that actually go on in here and in here matter just as much as the external things we do in this life. You see, it's pretty easy to go through your entire life without killing another human being. I mean, most of us will do that. We'll get to the end of our lives and we will have realized that we haven't murdered anybody. That's the story. That's the norm for most people. But very, very few, if any of us, will ever get through life without holding anger or resentment or bitterness in our hearts towards another person. And this is what Christ is saying to us. Our virtue has to be more than action or skin deep. It has to be something that is not just lived, but it has to be something that is loved in our hearts. We embrace virtue. We do what is right, not because the law commands us to do certain things and not do other things. We do what is right out of love for God, out of love for neighbour. And the call of today's gospel is, don't be like the Pharisees who are only focused in on the actions. Be more than that. Focus in on your thoughts. Focus in on your heart and your mind and what is going on in there as well. You see, one of the common things you hear people doing is they will accuse you of being a Pharisee or a doctor of the law or someone who's rigid if you are concerned about morality and virtue and you think these things are important. But that's really a false accusation, because the issue with the Pharisees was not that they were concerned about those things. The issue with the Pharisees was that they were hypocrites. They talked about them, but they didn't live them out. The problem is not people talking about morality. That's not what makes you a Pharisee. What makes you a Pharisee is if you are someone who talks about morality, but does not live that out in your own life and does not hold that interior disposition of desiring to be more virtuous in the way that you act, think, and speak about other people. Today's saint quote of the day comes from Saint Teresa of Avila, and she said this: "I would never want any prayer that would not cause the virtues to grow within me." In other words, if we're going to live out today's gospel call to a total and consistent life of virtue in our thought, word and deed, then we need to be praying for the grace to be able to live out the virtues more fully in our life. The Greeks, who talked a lot about virtue, honed in on this idea that no one was going to be good at every single virtue. Instead, each and every one of us was going to have areas of virtue in our life where we were strong and areas of virtue where we were weak and vulnerable and prone to temptation. And as Christians, our prayer should be something that is enhancing and causing us to flourish in a life of virtue. So that means our prayer is not about our own self-gratification. Our prayer is about seeking the fruit and the grace to develop in those areas where we are weak and vulnerable. It's about seeking the fruit and the grace to be more like Christ and to be drawn more deeply into His heart.